Blog Talk Radio.
It's the Jenny Hatch Show at Blogging Mothers Magazine, and I'm your host. My special guest today is Lawrence Sinclair. Larry has been an acquaintance of mine for the last several years, and I've carefully followed his story on the Internet for about 5 years. Over these years, I've written approximately 20 blog entries on my blog and at Blogging Mothers Magazine referencing his story, and other reporters, noted reporters like Lane Madsen, Webster Charpley, Jerome Corsi and Jack Cashel over at WorldNet Daily, and Kevin Dujan at HillBuzz have also written incredibly detailed and well-researched articles about Larry's story. And yet, ironically, today, I went to the Washington Post and the New York Times, Googled Larry's name, and there was nothing. There's been nothing for 5 years about this man, his story, what's happened to him. And so I've been reading a lot in this past week about the Washington Post and why it's going down the toilet. And, you editors and columnists and writers over at those newspapers, maybe you should connect the dots in your own heads and decide that if you were about telling the truth, that Larry might be somebody you might have wanted to send one of your writers to contact to write a story about. So it's my special honor to have Lawrence Sinclair on the show, and this is his story. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jenny. It's good to be here.
Why don't you go ahead and first just give us a little background about your connection to Barack Obama.
Well, let's do it like this. In 2008, I became the number one target of all things Obama after going public and just simply confronting the fact that his narrative on the extent of his drug use was not necessarily the truth. And I had revealed that in 1999, during a chance meeting in the Chicago area, that I had met Barack Obama, and that during that meeting we had engaged in some consensual sexual activity as well as drug use. Let's just say that by going public in 2008, I think you will agree, shortly thereafter, we realized exactly what the full extent of Internet stalking and harassment and government agency targeting could accomplish.
Well, and you also spent some time in jail, if I remember right.
That is correct, and that was one of the things in 2008 when I went public. I made my past history very much public as well. I pointed out that I do have felony convictions for bad checks and credit cards in Florida, Colorado, and Arizona.
Well, and your detractors love to talk about your past, but they sure don't want to talk about the president's past. What's the connection between Vice President Biden and the couple days you spent in jail around your national press conference?
Well, it went back to people trying to distort. Look, in 2008, people claim that I never disclosed my past, and I've actually provided, copies of print media that actually made it perfectly clear that I, disclosed my past from day one. So, in 2008, they were trying to manipulate that. I did the press conference on June 18th of 2008 at the National Press Club. Shortly thereafter, I was approached by 3 plainclothes officers that later turned out to be U.S. Marshals in a holding room off the Holman Lounge, saying that they had a warrant for my arrest for a fugitive from justice out of Delaware. I was taken into custody, put before a magistrate in the District of Columbia Superior Court. I was held for 6 days and then picked up by Delaware on a theft charge that really wasn't a theft charge. It turned out that they had done a sealed grand jury indictment approximately 2 weeks after my public YouTube video went out in January, they called this sealed grand jury on February 2nd, and I believe they handed down a sealed indictment on February 5th of 2008. Despite the fact that the court records claim that they mailed notice of the indictment, no notice was ever mailed. It turns out that the District of Columbia did not even have a warrant in their possession for my arrest, and the District of Columbia themselves only issued a warrant for a fugitive from justice in their jurisdiction 36 hours after I was already taken into custody and 12 hours after I had already appeared before a judge.
That just cracked me up. You know, I just read James O'Keefe's book, Breakthrough, and this is so reminiscent of the tactics that were used against him. And I actually think both of you men are just lucky to be alive, given the climate that's going on right now. Have you been surprised at all that the Benghazi CIA guys are saying things like, you know, it's not just us, it's our families that are at risk with the thugs in the White House right now?
Surprised is not even in my vocabulary anymore. Look, Jenny, if people will take the time to go back and look at exactly what took place with me and my family, or for that matter, anyone who posted a comment in support of me back in 2008, 2009, 2010, you will see if people had only listened then, we wouldn't be going through this scenario now to where people are just now finding out that you've got the Internal Revenue Service, you know, stalking you or investigating you or doing everything in their power, you know, to smear you. You wouldn't hear people like Catherine Elbridge with True the Vote talking about how she's withstood, you know, these massive invasions of privacy by the U.S. government. These are not surprises. What it was is people just didn't look. People, unfortunately, have this train of thought to where they don't want to listen or acknowledge something unless it happens to someone that they can sympathize with, or unless it happens to someone that they know personally, or unless it happens to them. I don't begrudge True the Vote's founder any of the newfound fame that she has at this point, but I do question the likes of Huckabee and others who are saying that this is the first story of a citizen, you know, having to undergo a microscope looking at every aspect of their life. No, it's not.
It's not.
You know, it's been going on since before Obama was elected. You heard last night that the American Freedom Fund was targeted in February of 2009, shortly after Obama was inaugurated. Interestingly enough, in the IRS case, we posted documents proving that it was 20 days after his inauguration that I was notified that all of a sudden I was under an IRS audit after being threatened for more than a year that it would happen. So people need to understand these aren't surprising things to me. I think that people do need to understand as well as we can't just take and say, okay, it's bad when it happens to this one because we can relate to them, but it's okay when it happens to someone else. And I think that attitude over the 2009, 2010, 2011 period actually brought about the agency's desire and feeling that they could do these things and actually get away with them.
I agree with you because I've always felt that the conservative press, and I'm talking about people like Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, those who have big platforms and big voices, they really did not take the time to cover, and they still don't. They have not covered your story. Kevin Dujon, the things that's happened to him since he started talking more specifically about Barack Obama's criminality. And, you know, my heart goes out to not just those of you who've been harassed and messed with in every conceivable way, but I'm also so heartsick over the murders. Could you just spend a minute talking about Donald Young?
Well, look, I raised the issue that Donald Young's murder was, one, it was not part of a serial killer targeting openly gay black men on the south side of Chicago, which was the initial reports out of the Chicago media and those in the community. And it was put out that way because shortly before Donald was murdered, there was another gentleman by the name of Larry Bland that was also murdered in a robbery. People, unfortunately, have tried to connect the two to Barack Obama, and I've asked people, don't do that, because it kind of takes away from shining the spotlight on the one murder that a lot of people do believe is connected to Obama and his campaign in 2008. I sincerely believe that. You don't have a person who makes contact with you out of the blue, who you've never spoken with, who you had no idea who it was, who has your personal cell phone number, and not just one, but multiple numbers in the course of you changing your cell phone number to reflect the local area that you're in. So Donald Young was murdered on December 23rd of 2007, a little more maybe than 2 weeks before the Iowa caucus, the 2008 Iowa caucus, where Obama pulled his upset. Since Obama's election, and since I filed the affidavit with the Chicago Police Department in April of 2008, bringing out, the communications that I had with him, you've got Donald's own mother, who was a former Chicago Police Department employee, come out and say that there's no doubt in her mind that her son was killed to protect Barack Obama's secrets. And people have just, dismissed this. Everybody says, Obama's too smart for that. It's not that Obama is too smart for that. It's the people who, and people need to understand, the Obama camp has individuals that are so devoted to all things Obama that they really do not think or even care about the consequences of things that they do in defense of Barack Obama.
Yeah,
and people do. Yeah, look, you hear about all of these murders in Chicago, the 4th of July, more than 21 or 14, between 14 and 21 murders in Chicago from gun violence alone during the 4th of July weekend. We talk about violence, but we don't talk about specifics. The fact that the Chicago Police Department refuses to cooperate with any public Freedom of Information Act request as to the status of the investigation. I did a FOIA request with them back in 2011, and they provided documents in the initial police reports. A lot of it was heavily redacted. We published it, contacted the Cook County Prosecutor's Office, was informed that according to their records, they did have, the Chicago PD did have a person of interest as recent as December of 2008, but that they were not releasing